All right, so let me just ask some direct questions based on things you've named, and I think I know the answers to these, but do you see embedded privilege at SDI that needs uprooting, excavating?
I see embedded privilege in most of us, me included, obviously. And it's different kinds of privilege. Some of it is defensive privilege, right? Defensive privilege, I mean, we're protecting ourselves, we're protecting our psychic integrity somehow. And we want to be heard. And maybe we want to be heard turns into we expect to be heard, and we expect to be heard turns into we demand to be heard, right? And that's when, we can get loud and insistent. Are there various kinds of privilege? Since there are in each of us as individuals, then by definition, any organization that we're part of also has certain privileges embedded into that. I would say not distinct from the people that make it up, but if an organization was created by a bunch of Zen Buddhists for the purpose of, calligraphy around how do you represent the universe, right? The Enso, those circles that we made. Is there some privilege there? Yes, of course. It's a Zen Buddhist organization. It uses the Enso as its manifestation, and there's a set of rules around how you express certain things. Now, if I invite someone who's not part of the Zen Buddhist tradition into that circle, and they don't share the same assumptions, they're gonna struggle. They're gonna say, "What the hell is this circle? And what does it mean? And what do you mean by the infinite? And what do you mean by the ultimate?" And I'm just using that as an example that you can configure in any religious or spiritual direction.
So
does that make any sense or not?
It does, yeah, because I've been to a few of your Zen gatherings, shindigs, and I felt very out of place and very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
When I don't have the robes, I don't know the postures, I don't know the rules. And as much as you tell me, it's okay, we're all fumbling through this together. And I know that, but I still feel out of place. And so I think maybe I do understand what you're talking about. But
well, I'll just say that all of us are continuously fumbling. It's just that we get better at disguising it as we go along. Really.
Yeah, that's true. Or we just accept that we're going to fumble and we're human. And
it becomes part of our MO.
Yeah. Let's talk about the demographics for a moment of SDI. So, because SDI was formed 30 plus years ago by Roman Catholics, it had in its mission statement that it was a Christian organization. Yeah. And now it doesn't. That's changed. That's shifted. We still have a very large contingent of Christians of all kinds in our organization.
Yes.
But other sort of orientations have also become manifest, right?
Yes.
Most of all, that's spiritual but not religious. And so for that, and I'm overgeneralizing here, but for that Roman Catholic person who has been with SDI for a long time and sees a shifting, changing landscape at SDI and is asking themselves, do I still belong here?
Yeah.
Or even longs for the old SDI, which I've heard before from people. What would you say to that person?
I would say that Catholic means universal. And universal means all-inclusive. Right? I would point it to the meaning of the word Catholic. I'm just using this one specific example. We can talk about other examples too. And that inclusive means that whatever good news you want to share, it's good news for the world. It's good news for everybody. It's good news for every person on the planet. And then, it's it's a skillful means conversation, and you can have that later. But SDI remains a space that is deeply welcoming of its original cohort, and we speak that language. We make offerings that are tailored to that part of our community, as we do to other parts of our community too. Right? I mean, that's another expression of diversity. But in terms of your question is, are they welcome? Of course they are. Of course they are. And why wouldn't they be? The welcome needs to extend further, because it needs to extend to everybody. But I think that is the main intent behind all of the world religions, as far as my understanding goes, is that they are invitational and inclusive, certainly in the ideal sense.
Mm-hmm. And we hope that members see that welcome, come manifest in our programming,
Mm-hmm.
right? So in the courses we offer, in the webinars, but also in the presenters too. Can you speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, we try to have diverse viewpoints represented in all of our staff, the teaching staff, the course presenters, the webinar presenters, our keynote speakers at conferences, and so you'll see, Catholics, and you'll see Christians of various denominations. You'll see our Jewish community represented, Buddhists, spiritual independents, increasingly are well represented in our various offerings. Muslims, among many others, right? And we have a course where we actually explored spiritual companionship from 10 or 11 different perspectives. And that's really the focus that whenever we put a course together or an educational offering, is that it be, first of all, invitational to all, even if it's rooted in one faith tradition. Say we do an offering on the Ignatian Way, right, and the examen and the exercises. That even though that comes out of the Catholic tradition, the Jesuit tradition in particular, that it is invitational to everybody. If I was to offer a Buddhism and spiritual companionship course, even though it would come out of the Buddhist tradition, it would be broadly invitational. So there's that dimension, and then we have offerings where we're covering multiple bases at once, and because everybody shedding light, the more people shed light on something, the better we can all see it. And to go back to your original question, I think of people like Raimundo Fanikar and Houston Smith, who, in the case of Raimundo, he was a Catholic priest and remained a deeply committed Christian his entire life. Even as he explored more and more deeply his Hindu roots and Vedantic roots and Buddhist roots and other roots as well. And he and Houston Smith both said that the more they explored, the more their own roots were strengthened. So one answer to how does diversity help is that it helps us in our own root tradition. The more exposed we are to diversity, the more comfortable we become in our own skin.
Yeah. So let me flip that coin a little bit and come back to another workshop that happened at the conference with Ilya Thilio and a couple of other presenters. And that workshop, or those presentations, were very much offered and named so from their Christian traditions.
Yeah. That
their work was very much rooted in their Christian traditions. And people in our community who do not identify as Christian kind of rubbed them the wrong way.
Yeah.
You mentioned skillful means a moment ago. How might we engage in interfaith dialogue and difference in a way that is generative and hospitable?
The best way to show that we're accommodating multiple viewpoints is to have multiple viewpoints represented. in our courses, in our webinars, in our stage. If that happens, then everyone's voice is heard. Everyone's voice is manifest. And then it's less likely that there's going to be strong reactions. It's when there's a perceived bias in favor of one over the others that people who don't belong to a particular tradition may, whatever tradition that is, right? Whatever orientation that is, that people may get triggered and respond strongly. As in certain assumptions have been made on my behalf that I'm not comfortable with, right? So I think having multiple voices represented in all of our dialogues is a good way to go. And we could certainly be more intentional about making sure that is so in the future. At the same time, everyone has the right to be who they are. And we've talked about this many times in the past, right? You don't have to sacrifice your identity to enter the public square at SDI. If you're a Buddhist priest, you enter as a Buddhist priest, and it's pretty obvious. If you're a Roman Catholic practitioner or follower, or a Muslim or a Jewish, you enter as who you are. You don't sacrifice your identity to enter, and everybody gets to recognize your identity and hopefully honor you for your identity. And that identity means there are certain assumptions that you have, that I have, that we all have as we enter, and that doesn't also mean that I'm speaking personally here. It's like, how do you do things? Oh, well, that's really interesting. And everyone, I always learn from these engagements, and particularly interfaith dialogue and interspiritual dialogue, because I'm always learning something that I didn't know. Oh, there's a different way to look at this. Maybe I can learn something here. Maybe there's some tool that I can absorb and use in my own tradition as well, incorporate into my own tradition. And very often, it's not even incorporate, because then you get recognition, like as in, oh, we do have this tool in our toolbox. It's just dusty and hasn't been brought out to the light of day in a long time. Contemplative practices of various kinds. We see it in the contemplative Christian movement these days, in particular, is that there's a lot of focus on contemplative discernment that has not always been at the forefront, especially during, if you have a tradition that spans hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Yeah, so let me follow up to that. Is there something that you have learned personally over the past few months, several months, including the conference, and how does that affect how we go forward as an organization?
Yeah, I'm always constantly learning to walk in somebody else's shoes. And by which I mean that there's always a new perspective to be appreciated and learn from, right? That there's I always use this example about if you go into a restaurant and you get a waiter who's being really rude to you and dismissive and irritable and just not focused on his work for whatever reason, and you get angry about it, you complain to the manager, and the manager says, well, he had to come into work, but his mother died this morning. That your perspective on that person and their behavior would shift instantly from anger and aggression to conciliation and appreciation and empathy. And I think that's a key learning that I keep making all the time, is that there's always room to understand each other better, because each of us don't know what the other person is carrying. So, and sometimes that's very, for reasons of safety, is deeply buried and protected, right? But occasionally it'll pop out in some way. And other people can easily misinterpret what's coming out, and it's some old trauma, or some new trauma, right? I lost my mother this morning, or my father this morning, or someone who I loved this morning, and I can't tell you that because that's not how we part of our conversation if I'm attending your table.
Yeah. And so it appears that we're more affected by something that was really the root of that is some hidden pain.
There's always deeper understanding that can be achieved. Always, right? Even and probably especially with people with whom we disagree most intensely. And we may not agree with them at the end of the process anyway, but in the process we will learn something more about them and about ourselves too.